This video is on poetry basics for Key Stage 4 Pathway 2, but might be useful for anybody else who's doing poetry. So poetry. Poetry is a form of literature and a very wide genre of writing. It's a form of imaginative writing that can be written by anybody, and people choose to write poetry based on many different things. Expressing thoughts, their feelings, or writing in a creative way about pretty much anything. The main aim of poetry is to involve and stimulate the thoughts of the reader. And poetry can connect with the reader on an emotional level too. Anybody can be a poet. So all you need to write a poem is you. Your thoughts, your feelings, your words, your ideas. Essentially just your voice. So what we're going to do through this video is to go over a few simple techniques to help you along the way. Stanza. Just like when we're writing in our creative writing, we tend to split our writing up into paragraphs. In poetry, these tend to be referred to as stanzas or verses. So a stanza is a group of lines gathered together by rhyming pattern or any other meter or metric. A stanza typically has 4 or more lines, and if it has more, it's normally referred to as a verse. The length and pattern of a stanza decides what type of poem it is. And stanzas are made by leaving a blank space before and after the verse or the stanza itself. An example of a stanza could be something like, I love to dance, I love to prance. What my heart would do, but be sad and true, if I could not dance. That would be the end of the stanza, and then I would start another. Rhyme. One of the first things most people would think about when thinking about poetry. So a rhyme occurs when 2 words of the sound the same when spoken out loud. These words usually have the same ending sound. However, they don't always seem to be spelt the same, or have to be spelt the same. Rhyme is used in poetry to create some very interesting type of reading, and is used to create a pattern within most poems. An example could be fright and night, wood, hood, male, stale, day and sway. These are examples of rhyming words. Verbs. You all know what verbs are, but verbs are great examples of what can be used in writing, and verbs are doing words, and they show actions within a sentence. Verbs are used in poetry quite a lot to create a range of different effects. They are used to create more interesting sentences and to help describe what different people or objects are doing. An example of this could be the boy ran, that's our verb, along the shoreline. The woman held her baby tightly. The verb in that sentence is held. Another way to try and keep your poetry exciting is to use interesting adjectives. Adjectives can be used for a more in-depth description of a noun, or they can be used to add a bit more excitement to a verse, a line, or a stanza. Things like roaring roads, the adjective here being roaring, describing the sound. Beaming headlights. Dark, cold night. The adjectives there being dark and cold to describe the feeling of the night. Synonyms. A synonym is a word that can have the same or similar meaning to another word. Synonyms can be found in a thesaurus. And synonyms are used in poetry quite a lot to help the poem become a bit more graphic and to give a broader description. Let's have a look at some synonyms for beautiful. We could instead use words such as attractive, gorgeous, stunning, or pretty. Similes. A simile is a figure of speech. It is one thing compared to another thing, and we use words such as or like. Similes can be as descriptive as the writer chooses them to be. They are normally used in poetry to give the reader a more descriptive or in-depth understanding of a particular object or a person. Here's an example of a simile. As busy as a bee. This is comparing someone's level of energy to the speed of a small bee. Runs like a cheetah. This is comparing the speed of which somebody is moving to that of the speed of a cheetah. Metaphors. Much like similes, metaphors are used to give a description of an object or a subject to something else. The difference here being that we don't use the word as or like. Metaphors are used in poetry to create an image of judgment or a comparison in the mind of a reader. An example of a metaphor might be, her eyes were glistening jewels. So here we didn't say glistened like jewels, we simply said glistening jewels. Another example could be, instead of saying hard as rock, you would simply say rock hard. That has now turned that simile into a metaphor because we've removed the word like or as. Onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia is a word that imitates a sound or suggests the sound that is being made by an object or a person. It is used in poetry to create certain effects to make the description more expressive and more interesting. An example, slamming a door. You could use the word bang, that's an onomatopoeic word. The buzzing of a bee. You'd say buzz. It sounds a lot like the sound it's making. Pop, the word, is much the same as the sound you're hearing. If you're familiar with poetry, you'll be familiar with the use of repetition. Now, repetition is when words, sentences, or phrases are written more than once in a poem. Repetition is used in poetry to help make poems more interesting and to help create patterns. Depending on the word or phrase that is repeated, repetition allows for more emphasis to be placed on certain themes, ideas, or objects. An example of repetition might be something like using a chorus in a poem. This is where the verse or the phrase is repeated. Alliteration. Alliteration is when the sound or letter at the beginning of each or most words in a sentence are the same. Alliteration is used in poetry to create many different effects. It can be used to create a greater and more interesting description of different themes, people, or objects. Here's an example of alliteration. Sally sells seashells by the seashore. The sound for alliteration here is the S, the Sally, sea, sells. Syllables. A syllable is a unit of written or spoken words. Syllables are broken up sounds that are used to create words. Here's an example of a syllable. Cat has one syllable. There's one bounce in that word. Fluffy. You bounce twice in that word, 2 syllables. Example of 4 syllables. My faithful pet. My faithful pet. 4 bounces, 4 syllables in that sentence. Consonance. Consonance occurs when a consonant or a consonant pattern is repeated 2 or more times in a short space of writing. Consonance is used in poetry to create a range of different rhyming effects. It also makes it more enjoyable and interesting to the reader. Here's an example of consonants. Pitter patter, pitter patter. Using the t and the letters creates consonants. Pitter, patter, pitter, patter. Hyperbole. Now, hyperbole is a figure of speech which involves an exaggeration of an idea. Hyperbole is used in poetry to provide strong effects and to provide greater emphasis. An example of exaggeration would be something like, I'm so hungry I could eat a horse. I can't eat a horse. I'll try. But at the same time, this is giving an example of how hungry I am, which is more than normal. I hope that video was helpful. We will have some more poetry videos available soon on intermediate techniques and also on the different types of poetry that you might find yourself reading. Bye.